to think my family was proud of me. Not in the loud banner over the garage way. Not in the kind of way that gets photographed and framed. More in the practical way. The way people say, "We always knew you'd do something with yourself," as if faith and memory are the same thing. I was the first one in my branch of the family to finish college without stopping, without moving back home midway through, without changing majors every year, without letting one bad semester become a permanent story. That probably sounds defensive. Maybe it is. But people only call you resilient for years, when they have watched you do most of it alone. I worked mornings at a bakery before classes. I took campus jobs nobody wanted, usually the ones that involved folding tables, checking inventory, or sitting in fluorescent offices where printers made sad choking noises all afternoon. I sold old textbooks, missed weekend trips, and learned how to treat exhaustion like a scheduling problem. By senior spring, I had exactly one thing in mind besides graduating. Leaving town for 4 days with my 2 closest friends, just long enough to feel the edge between surviving something and actually finishing it. It was not a glamorous trip. That is part of why what happened still bothers me. There was nothing extravagant to resent, no luxury resort, no tropical fantasy, just a rented cabin on the edge of a small lake 3 hours north, one dented SUV, a cooler, a bag full of thrifted sweatshirts, and the kind of cheap celebratory plans people make when money is real. Mina made a spreadsheet for gas and groceries. Tess booked a kayak rental using a discount code she was absurdly proud of. I paid my share 2 months in advance because I know what life does to money when you wait too long. I told my family about the trip weeks earlier. Not because I needed permission, just because it felt nice, for once, to say something in advance that belonged to me. My mother smiled and said, "That sounds sweet." My sister Lena said, "Must be nice." Then she laughed, which made it hard to know whether the line was envy, a joke, or the sort of family comment that only reveals its meaning later. Lena was 9 years older than me, married, organized, and the kind of woman who had children early enough that the rest of us got used to orbiting her schedule. She had 3 kids, all under 10, and a house that always looked like a lifestyle ad, trying very hard to seem effortless. There were labeled baskets, seasonal hand towels, a chalkboard calendar by the fridge. The kind of competence people praise so often it hardens into power. If Lena needed help, the family rearranged around it. That had always been true. When her oldest had ear infections, Thanksgiving got moved. When her husband took a new job, my mother spent 3 weekends painting their guest room. When their babysitter quit last winter, my cousin skipped a concert to cover date night because, as my mother put it, young people can be flexible. I notice these things. I just never thought I was noticing a pattern that would eventually include me. Graduation was on a Saturday. The trip was supposed to start Monday morning. On Sunday evening, I was on my apartment floor, half folding clothes, half staring at the cap and gown still hanging on my closet door, when Lena called. She did not start with hello. She started with, "I need a huge favor." There are people who can say that and make it sound humble. Lena always made it sound like the favor had already been approved somewhere above your head. I put her on speaker and kept packing. That was my first mistake. I was still relaxed enough to think the conversation belonged to normal life. She said their sitter had canceled. Not for an hour, not for the evening, for the whole week. Apparently, she had a family emergency out of state and was leaving first thing in the morning. Lena and Greg were supposed to leave Tuesday for a 4-night anniversary trip they had booked months ago. A vineyard hotel, a spa package, something with tasting menus and robes, and the kind of language married people use when they want to sound overdue for romance. I said, "Oh no," because that seemed like the obvious human response. Then she said, "So I need you to stay in town and keep the kids." Not "could you?" Not "is there any chance?" Not even the courtesy performance of knowing I might have plans. Just the assignment, spoken like a conclusion. I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because my brain thought there had to be missing information. I said, "I leave tomorrow morning." She paused in a way that sounded less surprised than inconvenienced. Then she said, "Right, the little lake thing, the little lake thing." That phrase did more damage than the request. Because, in 4 words, she managed to shrink the only thing I had chosen for myself all season. Not graduation, not a celebration, not a plan I had paid for, just the little lake thing. I reminded her I had already paid. My friends were counting on me, and this was literally my graduation trip. She sighed. Not loudly, just enough to let me know I had become difficult faster than she expected. Audrey, she said, you can go to a lake anytime. We can't just move an anniversary booking 2 days before. Interesting word, when the labor belonged to me. I said, you're asking me to cancel my trip so you can keep yours. She answered immediately, no, I'm asking you to help family during a crunch. People love replacing the actual sentence with a cleaner one. That is how they keep their reflection flattering. I told her I was sorry their sitter canceled, but I could not do it. I said I had worked all year, I had already committed, and I was leaving in the morning. There was a long silence. Then Lena said, wow, just that. A whole verdict inside one syllable. I knew what would happen next before it happened, which might be the clearest sign this was never about one emergency. Within 15 minutes, my mother called. She used her soft voice, the one she uses when she wants to sound fair, while standing entirely on one side of the argument. Honey, she said, your sister is in a really hard spot. I asked if Lena had told her about my trip. Of course, she said, but this isn't the same as a vacation. She and Greg need this time together. Need. Another useful word. My trip was apparently optional joy. Theirs was medical oxygen. I said, I need this too, and there it was, the sentence that turned the whole thing into a story I have not been able to unknow. My mother said, you just graduated. The point is already done. The point is already done. I do not think she meant to be cruel. That is what makes it worse. Cruelty would have been easier to sort. What she meant was practical, administrative. As if the ceremony had happened, therefore the meaning had been spent, and anything after that was just decorative. I sat on the floor, looking at the packed duffel beside me, and for the first time, I felt something colder than anger. I felt ranked. Not unloved exactly, that would have been simpler, just placed beneath married life, beneath parenthood, beneath the emergencies and comforts of people considered more central, more adult, more entitled to continuity than I was. I told my mother the trip was not random. It was the first thing I had looked forward to in months. It was paid for. It involved other people. It mattered. She said it matters, but not in the same way. There are sentences that explain your family to you long after the call ends. That was one. Not in the same way. I asked her whether she had told Lena to cancel her anniversary trip. My mother sounded almost offended. Don't be unfair, she said. They never get time alone. I almost laughed then, because I could hear it so clearly. My sister's pleasure had been promoted into necessity. Mine had been demoted into negotiable youth. By then I had 3 text messages from Lena. The first said, I really can't believe you'd do this. The second said, do you know how hard it is to replace childcare overnight for 3 kids? The third said, I guess I know where I stand. That last line always fascinates me, because it is exactly what I was learning too. I called Mina and told her I might have a family situation. She went quiet for half a second, then said, wait, are they seriously asking you to cancel? When I said yes, she did not rush to soothe anyone. She said, no, absolutely not. They can cancel their own trip. That was the first moment I felt less crazy. Sometimes all you need is one person who is not invested in your old family script. Tess was even blunter. She said, your graduation is not a waiting room for other people's convenience. I wrote that down later. Not because it was poetic, because it was accurate. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was torn about what to do, because I was grieving something I had not realized I was still trying to earn. I think part of me believed that once I graduated, my family would see me differently. Not as the available one, not as the youngest one, not as the extra pair of hands, but as someone whose plans generated gravity of their own. Instead, my reward for finishing something hard was discovering how quickly my milestone could be folded down, put on a shelf, and replaced with somebody else's itinerary. At 6:40 the next morning, while the sun was still making the apartment windows look gray, my mother sent a final message. Call me before you make this worse. Make this worse. As if the original injury were my refusal to absorb it quietly. I did not call. I put my phone face down, carried my bag downstairs, and slid into Mina's back seat with a coffee so hot it felt medicinal. Nobody talked much for the first half hour. They could tell by my face that conversation would have to earn its place. Then we merged onto the highway, city buildings giving way to long stretches of summer trees. And something strange happened. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel rebellious. I felt sad in a clean, adult way, like I had finally stopped negotiating with evidence. Around 9, my phone lit up again. A message from Lena. Hope the lake was worth this. Not, we figured something out. Not even, I'm overwhelmed. Just that. Hope the lake was worth this. As if I had purchased my freedom from the family, rather than simply refusing to donate it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I turned my phone off. The trip itself was beautiful, which almost feels rude to admit. The cabin smelled like pine boards and old coffee. The lake was colder than it looked. There was a dock that creaked when you stood at the end of it. And one night we ate grocery store cupcakes on the porch because Tess insisted graduation deserved candles even if the frosting looked industrial. I smiled. I laughed. I even relaxed. But every good moment had a shadow under it. Not because I regretted going, but because I kept replaying the language, the little lake thing. The point is already done. Not in the same way. Hope the lake was worth this. By the second day, I understood why comment sections explode over stories like this. People are not only debating obligation, they are identifying the invisible accounting systems inside families. Who gets protected from inconvenience? Who gets told to be mature? Who gets treated like a real adult when they say, this matters to me? And who gets told their timing is unfortunate? When I got back, Lena had found backup childcare through Greg's sister and a retired neighbor splitting the week, which meant the apocalypse had not been an apocalypse at all. It had simply been expensive, inconvenient, and apparently still less costly than asking the married couple to give anything up themselves. My mother told me everyone had been stressed, and I should not drag this out. That phrase almost made me admire the consistency. First, they tried to shrink the trip. Then they tried to shrink the aftermath. I saw Lena the next Sunday at my aunt's cookout. She was normal in the most strategic way possible, passing napkins, adjusting a juice box straw for one of the kids, talking to me about the weather, as if the cleanest way to win was to act like the injury had only existed because I made it meaningful. At one point she said, we managed. I said, I know. And that was the whole conversation. But inside it was another one. She meant, see, it all worked out. I meant, exactly. And you still wanted it to cost me first. I wish I could say the ending was dramatic. That I gave a speech. That my mother apologized. That Lena recognized herself in a new light and started asking different things. Real life is usually less charitable than that. What actually changed was quieter. I stopped volunteering automatically. I stopped treating every family request like a test I had to pass to prove I was loving. I stopped translating my own plans into smaller words so other people would not feel challenged by them. And the next time someone in my family said, you're young, you can be flexible, I heard the full sentence underneath it, you are still the easiest person to move. That was the truth this story gave me. Not that families should never ask for help. Not that childcare problems are fake. Not that marriage and parenthood are less important. Just this. If the people who love you only recognize your milestone, until it inconveniences someone they rank above you, then what they are celebrating is not really your life. It is your usefulness. The hardest part of growing up, I think, is not learning how to say no. It is learning how many relationships were quietly built on your inability to do it.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.